Forget the briefings. Forget the promises. This is the truth of the Vietnam War. The night was supposed to be silent. It was Tet, the Vietnamese New Year. The truce was expected. But at 2:45 a.m. on January 30th, 1968, silence was shattered by an explosion that echoed across a nation. Suddenly, Vietnam was not a map of clear front lines. It was a map of 100 simultaneous explosions. Over 80,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops, the enemy that General Westmoreland said was on the ropes, ignited an assault on every major city, every military compound, and every civilian center in South Vietnam. This was not a skirmish. This was an all-out, coordinated national invasion that launched from the shadows. The enemy was not waiting in the jungle. They were already in the streets. They were in the sewers. They were in the apartments just across the alley. This is the story of the surprise that defined a generation of combat. This is the night the war came home. The deepest breach was in Saigon. The capital, the heart of the American operation, was instantly an inferno. The most direct, brutal action was at the American embassy. At 3 a.m., a small, highly trained Viet Cong sapper team blew a hole in the outer wall. They stormed the embassy compound, the absolute symbol of American power. The initial defense was chaos. American military police, clerks, and Marines scrambled into the fight, battling face-to-face against an enemy they never saw coming. The fight was hand-to-hand and desperate. The American security team fought from behind flower pots and trees. Helicopters could not land. The commandos were eventually contained, but the image, the sheer reality of the enemy breaching the embassy, was catastrophic. It proved that no perimeter, no briefing, no map was sacred. The U.S. military had been violated in its own headquarters. Simultaneously, the Viet Cong targeted the presidential palace, the radio station, and even the Saigon airport. The American High Command was literally fighting its way out of its own headquarters just to establish communication. The first hours of the Tet Offensive were pure, unadulterated chaos. While Saigon was shock, Hue City was slaughter. The North Vietnamese Army, NVA, seized the ancient imperial capital and its massive stone citadel, fortifying every building, every window, and every street. The task of retaking Hue fell to the U.S. Marines. This was not the quick fire and maneuver of the jungle. This was the most brutal, sustained urban warfare of the entire war. The Marines had to fight block by block, building by building. Every corner was a kill zone. They could not use airstrikes or heavy artillery for fear of leveling the city and killing thousands of civilians. The fighting was relentless. It took nearly a month of close-quarters combat, a brutal grinding operation known as the Marine Meat Grinder, to clear the city. The Marines took severe casualties. They won the city back, but the victory was measured in rubble and blood, not ground gained. The raw, horrifying reality of urban combat was tattooed onto every soldier who survived Hue. Across the entire nation, the fighting was savage. At Khe Sanh, the enemy tightened their diversionary siege, forcing the U.S. military to expend massive air power just to keep the base alive. At smaller bases, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces fought desperate engagements, often surrounded, often outnumbered. Militarily, the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces were superior. They fought back with devastating efficiency. By the end of February, the enemy had been driven out of almost every city. The Viet Cong suffered massive, unsustainable casualties, estimated at over 40,000 dead. They were virtually wiped out as a fighting force in the south. But the cost was staggering. Thousands of Allied soldiers died. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed or displaced. And the political cost, back in America, was fatal. The generals had won the tactical battles, but they had lost the war of perception. The American public saw the images of death on the embassy lawn, the destruction of Hue, and the chaos in Saigon, and they knew they had been lied to. They realized the war was far from won. The most powerful military on earth could not secure a single capital city. The fighting was over, but the faith was dead. The Tet Offensive proved that America could win every battle and still lose the war. It was the moment the U.S. military began fighting not for victory, but for an exit. The fires of Tet scorched the American conscience, defining the combat that followed for years. Join us next time on War Stories, as we enter more untold conflicts that shaped our world.